This week, Jeff Sandy tells us about his special relationship with Nancy and Ronald Reagan during his first presidential campaign.
After that event, they requested me. So during the great debate at Stouffer's in on the square and all other places, she would say, "Make sure Mr. Sandy's on this detail." Wow. So for a year, until November when we had the election, for many, many months, I was, whenever Northern Ohio was the key election at that year.
Yep.
So I was able to work many Secret Service details, and Mrs. Reagan, for whatever reason, always said, "Where's Mr. Sandy at?" Which that meant so much to me.
What she really said is, "Where's that stud, Jeff? I want him up here."
I like him in his tight jeans with them oil stains.
Yeah.
Welcome to Game of Crimes. Just as we were coming onto this, Murph is regaling me with yet another free T-shirt he has gotten. Have you paid for any clothing like in the last 3 years, 4 years?
Well, hey, I'm retired. I'm a turtle. That's what we do. And it's not just one free T-shirt from this week. It's actually 3. I got the one I have on now from the Colorado Sting conference. I think it was their 29th year of their conference out in Pueblo, Colorado. Fantastic. Those guys treated us like kings. But then I got 2 free shirts from Big Brothers Big Sisters National Conference. I got to speak there earlier this week. And I got to tell you, that was an honor. I love going to speak at the law enforcement conference and corporate events and colleges and so forth. But that's an organization that's out there really trying to help kids. So I was honored, truly honored to be there.
Well, and speaking of truly honored, yes, most of you will be truly honored to know that I am the host of the show, Morgan Wright. We hadn't even got to that yet. And as you hear, I'm here with Mr. Freebie himself.
Yeah, Steve Murphy, but call me Murph.
The king of free. Yes, if it's free, it's for me.
Yeah, hey, if you want instructions, call me. Or text me, email me. I'll tell you how to do it.
Of course, it costs you $9.99 to get Steve's tips, but we do.
It's $99.99. Come on now.
Well, I was discounting. Anyway, hey, but guys, just some quick housekeeping because that's what it says in the script. Just head on over to Apple Review, 5 stars. Really helps out a lot. That and Spotify. Spotify's added that too, and hopefully other people will too. But give us a review no matter what platform you are. It does help us. Really helps us too. Is head on over to our website, gameofcrimespodcast.com. We put everything there. We put our books. We put our pictures of our guests. We've got our merch there, and anything that we might be doing upcoming will also be listed there. But follow us also on the social media at Game of Crimes on Twitter, at Game of Crimes Podcast on Facebook, and the Instagram. But where you got to be, where you got to be, where you got to be. I'm going to ask you one last time, Murph, where you got to be.
What was the question? Hey, listen, no, you've got to come over to Patreon. Just give us a shot over there. See if you like what we have, the content.
Do not use the C word this time.
I won't. Boy, that could go a couple different directions. Okay, let's get back on track here. Just come over, check us out, see if you like the content. We're always open to suggestions. A lot of what we put on there comes from our listeners. They're interested in what we're talking about.
Players. So, they come from you, our players.
Give us a try. Just check us out.
And you're going to love the stuff too. Like I said, we've got some really fun stuff, and we've got coming up. It will be starting by the time this episode comes out, episode 1. Of the Real DA Narcos, talking about the Real DA Narcos. Cali edition will be available at the Guardian of the Realm or Warden of the Throne level. And trust me, folks, you do not want to miss this. This is the most in-depth, best told story about the takedown of if you want to know what it's like to be on the inside of an operation to take down some of the most dangerous people in the world, even though they call themselves the gentlemen of the Cali cartel.
There's nothing gentle about them.
Nothing gentle about killing people, slinging dope,
right.
And sending out sicarios to do your work. So you got to listen to us over there on that Patreon. And you can find us at patreon.com/Game of Crimes. It's very easy. Use the interwebs, type in those keys on your keyboard, and it will take you magically through the Al Gore's amazing internet. It will take you to our webpage, and you can sign up for Patreon.
And then afterwards, let us know what you think. If you think it sucks, tell us. We can have differences of opinion. It doesn't mean we have to be enemies. We can still be friends. So we want to put on content on there that you want to hear.
And let me tell you, one thing I do pride ourselves on is we have tried very hard on our podcast, the free stuff. We do not get political. We don't proselytize. We just tell the stories. We do have a little bit more fun on Patreon, but you know what? A lot of that's driven by you, our players. You guys give us ideas for episodes. You guys give us ideas for stories. You give us feedback, and this is what we live for. And I'll tell you, probably one of the funnest things we do is our monthly Q&A. We have gotten some really strange questions, and we've gotten some really cool questions. But here's the thing: we answer every question. So if you want to hear what Murph and I think, or you want to ask us about the career or the things we did in this life of ours, by the way, speaking of that, we got a really great episode coming up with somebody who lived the life, but I won't, say no more. Yep. But anyway, just, you got to head over there to patreon.com/Game of Crimes. But guess what, Murph?
What?
You can also get to us at paypal.com/ and just use our email address, gameofcrimespodcast@gmail.com or paypal.me/gameofcrimes, whatever it makes it easier for you to support the show and help us bring you, help us help you bring more exciting content. But before we get started, we just have to do a quick disclaimer. This is a show about crime. We talk about bad people doing bad things and bad people, and sometimes really bad people doing bad things to good people. We take the stories absolutely seriously, but...
You know this, we never take ourselves serious, and we're going to have some fun. These are serious topics, but we're going to have a good time with it.
But before we get to the serious topics,
yes,
it is time for
Small Town Police Blotter.
Murph, have you ever had a theory about a case? And you guys talk about the theory, right? It's like, well, we think he might do this. I don't know who came up with this, but whoever this gentleman is in law enforcement should get a frickin' Nobel Prize.
Okay.
This gentleman's name is Cooper. I thought it was Copper because that would sound Cooper. But he says right now, we've got two theories right now, Cooper said with the police department. One is that James knew the person who did this, and the other is he did not.
Wait a minute. Is that Yogi Berra?
When you come to the fork in the road, take it,
That's hilarious. That's a rocket scientist right there.
One is that they did it, and the other one is they didn't. Oh, yeah. Well, of course, Skippy. You got anything original there? But anyway, Steve, I thought I would enlighten you with the small town police blotter case theory algorithm.
Is it? Who's the father of law enforcement?
Sir Robert Peel.
Sir Robert Peel. I was going to say Vincent Peel. I'm pretty sure he didn't come up with that.
No, that was not one of the 9 principles of Peelian policing. One of the Peelian principles. No, it is not. But. We talk about rocket scientists a lot.
It's like looking out your window and say, it's either daylight or it's dark. Jeez. Guy's a rocket scientist.
Rocket scientist. Anyway, speaking of rocket scientists, Steve, this next guy is definitely not a rocket scientist. On November 18th, a man wearing a sweatshirt with a hood pulled tightly over his head and a mask covering all but his eyes pounded on the front door of the Security Savings Federal Bank in a little town in North Carolina, scaring employees inside. After several loud attempts to push the door open, which is a pull door, he fled. Police say the same dude did the same thing just a couple weeks earlier. All I can think of is that Far Side cartoon. It says Midvale School for the Gifted, and it shows this kid, looks like a little brainiac, pushing on a door, and the door clearly says pull.
Yeah, this guy needs to get a career change if that's the best he can do.
Yeah.
Well, if he had a real weapon, why didn't he just reach, pull his weapon out and shoot the door down?
He couldn't find it. With that hood pulled over, probably constricted his blood flow. But
oh, my goodness.
Steve, you went to college, right? And at college, did you guys have a fraternity there?
Yes, sir. Alpha Phi Delta.
Alpha Phi Delta. I was a Sigma Chi, in case anybody out there is keeping score. And But there's another fraternity called Iota Gamma Upsilon. And they apparently out of college, and they got in trouble by the campus police because, move-in day and everything, parents are bringing their kids there. They had a sign placed on the front lawn that read freshman daughter drop-off site.
Oh.
I'll tell you what, as a father, if I'd seen that, oh my God.
Same way here. We our youngest daughter, we took her to college. There were the guys from the frats out there to help you carry your stuff to your room. And we might be a little suspicious as dads and former cops, but they're all just checking out the new talent coming to class. That's why you stay very close to your daughter while you're there.
Yeah, and same thing when we're moving our daughter into college. I mean, it's not like I was suspicious, but a couple of guys that said, okay, hands behind your head,
Yeah.
don't move. I just got to pat you down real quick. Okay, what's your name?
Every time you see me show up to campus, I want you up on the wall.
That's right.
Don't make me tell you again.
Grab some wall, Skippy. Grab some wall. Anyway, so thus endeth the reading for today. Kyrie Domine Danes Requiem. That is it. But hey, guess what? That's not just because that's it. That does not mean where it ends, right?
Right.
Because
we're just getting started.
We are just getting started. And speaking of getting started, this is one that it was funny because, funny not haha, but funny because you ran into this gentleman, which ended up giving us 2 episodes between him and another person. And they both come out of West Virginia. And I got to tell you, Murph, I was surprised how articulate, how well composed these gentlemen were being from West Virginia. You just pulled a shocker on me.
You're from Kansas. You can't make fun of anybody, man.
Well, West Virginia is the only state we are allowed to make fun of, that and Nebraska. So we're like 48th on the list. You're 49th and Nebraska's 50th.
Yeah, I don't think so. No, but it was. Javi and I were speaking at the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners for the Central Ohio chapter up in
Which
Columbus.
Has to be an exciting because everybody had their pocket protectors and ballpoint pens and pads and calculators, right?
And they're going to whip your ass next time you come to Ohio, by the way. No, and so, we get up there and when we're doing our show, I tell people where I'm from, where I grew up, and, and some people will ask questions about where I worked prior to DEA. And these 2 guys came up afterwards and one, the guy we're talking to today, Jeff Sandy, is a retired IRS agent. Now, I've worked with a lot of IRS agents, and in your investigations, you always want an IRS agent
Yep, buddy.
part of it, especially one of the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force, OCDF investigations, because they can get access to financial documents that nobody else can. But I've never seen anybody as proactive as Jeff Sandy. The things that he's getting ready to tell you about, I'll be honest with you, I was shocked that an IRS agent was doing this.
Well, I was more shocked, too, because his first time meeting the other guest that we're going to be talking to, Tom Kirk. Tom Kirk is operating undercover for the West Virginia State Police. Looks like a, full-blown druggie, bad guy. And here's Jeff Sandy, the IRS guy, wearing a shirt and tie going, are you going to roll me in this parking lot? What the hell's that? Is a hilarious story. I mean, wait till you hear this story. And but I'm like you, I'm impressed. Not only that, but I'm impressed with what Jeff has done with his career. And by the way, folks, this is the first time we have had a cabinet level secretary from any state on our show. Jeff is currently the cabinet level, the Secretary for Homeland Security for the great state of West by God, Virginia.
Absolutely. And I'm tickled to death to have Jeff on here. I can't wait for you to hear Tom because of how his career progressed and where he ended up. I don't want to spoil it. We'll talk about him when his turn comes.
Tom is 2 episodes after that.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I'm anxious for them to hear Tom's story as well as Jeff's story because
we're not
Tom's
talking about Tom. We're talking about Jeff.
Let me finish.
You stay on
you
task.
Interrupt me again. I'm gonna.
You're in Florida. What are you going to do? Hop on your scooter and come after me?
I'm gonna turtle my ass on up there. You never know what's going to happen. But it is what Jeff. I mean, just from starting out as a street level agent, he's going to tell you his career. Actually, became the sheriff of Wood County, West Virginia, at one point. Rather than wasting time, let's get into Jeff's story here, man. It is fascinating.
Well, Steve, we can't get into the story and hear all these fascinating stuffs about Jeff until we ask the penultimate question. Are you ready to play the biggest, baddest, Country Roads Take Me Home, most dangerous game of all, the game of crimes?
And you know what? We ought to play that song on this too. But ladies and gentlemen, get in, sit down, shut up, and hold on. Come on, Jeff. Tell us how you did it.
So I have to tell you, before we tell you who our next guest is, I had a friend of mine, and you'll appreciate this in a second, Jeff. He worked actually for TIG, Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration. Mm-hmm. And I used to call him on the phone all the time because they would have to say, Special Agent Bill Taylor, Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration. I say, Bill, sorry, man, I got a call coming in. I'll call you right back. I would do that like 3 times, and he'd basically get mad at me. However, though, when Bill would introduce himself, because, people in government don't want to say who they work for. They say, what do you do? He would never say IRS. He says, I work for a small nonprofit organization.
It's the only organization in the U.S. government besides DEA that makes more money than it spends.
Hey,
right?
And that's a great thing. So let's welcome, before we get too far down the road, Jeff Sandy, currently the Cabinet Secretary for Homeland Security for the great state of West Virginia, where Murph happens to hail from.
Yeehaw,
Sir, welcome to the podcast.
Jeff.
Well,
Glad to
thank
have
you
you on
for
the show.
having me, sir.
No, it's an honor.
No sirs here. We work for a living. All right.
Mhm.
So
Well, we used to.
Now we just pontificate and do podcasts for a living. So,
Yeah.
hey, but Jeff, as we do with everybody when we get started, we want to talk about, how did you get into this thing of ours that we call law enforcement? So let's talk first about, where you grew up at. I mean, are you a West Virginia person from birth, or did you just decide to move there?
Yes, sir. I grew up in a very, very small town in West Virginia called Dallison, West Virginia. And our claim to fame was one time, and they dropped off an individual from a Greyhound bus, and he thought he was coming to Dallas, and said it was Dallas, and so that was our claim to fame. But grew up very proud of this gentleman. Grew up in a very poor family, but a family which we always had food on the table. Our parents did in fact graduate from high school, but every one of our five siblings graduated from college, university. So we were brought up right, and I think we've done right in our life. But when I went to Parkersburg High School, my goal in life was I wanted to get a degree in physical education, and I wanted to come back and be the head baseball coach at Parkersburg High School. So, when I went to Marshall University, and gentlemen, that's a story within itself.
The Thundering Herd.
The Thundering Herd. But you see, Mr. Murphy here has a WVU shirt on. My two older sisters had went to WVU, and Go Mountaineers. And I was watching a black and white TV when the news came across as to the Marshall plane crash.
Yep.
And I looked at my dad and said, "Dad, I'm going to go to Marshall." And he didn't really like that because he wanted me to go to WVU, but I went to Marshall. But in the same breath, gentlemen, a friend of mine, I've told you I was from a family that was not well to do. He advised me that the United States government was hiring low income kids for a stay in school campaign. And I applied for what is called the United States Treasury Bureau of Fiscal Services. Then they called it public debt. And when I went down to the unemployment office as a 17-year-old kid, they said, "Well, we have no more jobs working at public debt. How would you like to work for the IRS?" So I started working the summer before I was going to go to college, and they liked my work ethic. And they said, "How would you like to work when you go to Marshall University at our Huntington office?" And I said, "Sure." So while I was there, they were working an investigation on the governor for the state of West Virginia. And I got to actually meet special agents, which then it was called the Intelligence Division, the IRS Intelligence Division. And I met those guys, and they said, "How would you like to talk to our chief?" And that guy, Ben Hayes, great guy. And so they arranged for me to talk to Ben Hayes. And Ben Hayes said, "You cannot become a special agent with a degree in physical education. You need to switch your major to accounting." And I switched my major to accounting, and I worked through college for the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service. And then upon graduation, lo and behold, I get a letter stating, "How would you like to be a special agent with IRS intelligence in Cleveland, Ohio?" And so that I lucked into be going into law enforcement, from going from a baseball coach to a special agent with IRS Intelligence Division.
But you had to go to Cleveland.
I went to Cleveland and I enjoyed it, sir. I was, as you know, you get to you're placed on the surveillance teams.
Mm-hmm.
And on the surveillance teams, of course, it was organized crime that you were following. But in addition, and you guys might like this story, in addition, all Treasury at that time assisted the United States Secret Service. And being a low-grade special agent, anytime you work for the Secret Service, it was overtime. So, buddy, we wanted that. We wanted that. So I hope you enjoy this story, but I'm on the east side of Cleveland in a very bad neighborhood, and they call and say, we need you at Burkefront Airport as soon as possible. Governor Reagan's wife is coming in, and we do not have enough people, so please come in. And I say, look, and I look like a bum. I mean, I've got blue jeans with oil all over them, blending in. So they said, come, we'll put you on the runway somewhere. So I get there, I run in, and they say, you're to open the door for Governor Reagan's wife, Nancy. And I said, look at me. And they said, don't worry about it. So Nancy Reagan, I opened the door for her, and she comes in and she stops right in front of me. And she looks at my feet. She goes up, looks at my head, looks at my feet, and she puts out her hand and says, I am Nancy Reagan. Who are you? And I introduced myself to her, and she says, very nice to meet you. So the following day, Ronald Reagan, Governor Reagan, is supposed to be at the Cleveland Clinic. So I figured now, since I look like a bum the day before, they'll probably put me in the highest garage somewhere. But instead, my job is to close this big iron gate as soon as the governor's limousine goes through. And needless to say, there's a traffic jam. And the window rolls down, and it had the big seal of the state of California on it. The window comes down, and Nancy Reagan leans over Ronald Reagan, and she says, I want you to know something, Mr. Sandy. She remembered my name. I thought that was shocking. She goes, you look much better today.
You know what would have been really bad is if she would have come out and seen you there and just reached into her purse and given you a 10 and says, here, go get yourself a meal.
Right. Exactly right.
Well, you must have left an impression on her if she remembered your name.
Well, after she introduced me to Ronald Reagan, after that event, they requested me. So during the great debate at Stouffer's in on the square and all other places, she would say, make sure Mr. Sandy's on this detail. Wow. So for a year, until November when we had the election, for many, many months, I was, whenever Northern Ohio was the key election at that year. So I was able to work many Secret Service details, and Mrs. Reagan, for whatever reason, always said, where's Mr. Sandy at? Which that meant so much to me.
What she really said is, where's that stud, Jeff? I want him up here.
I like him in his tight jeans with them oil stains. Yeah. Hey, but one thing people don't realize too, and give us just a quick history lesson, right? A lot of people look at Secret Service now and they see him under Department of Homeland Security, but the United States Secret Service used to be an arm of the U.S. Treasury.
Right. Absolutely. And also DEA was part of Treasury and ATF. What the hell happened with Treasury? They just lose their ability to manage agencies? What's the deal here? Or no, I know what it was. FBI decided we don't have enough people over at DOJ, so they invited you guys to come over, didn't they? Well, I wasn't privy to those high-level meetings like that. But I will tell you this: I was outside the room when they were developing the national strategy for the Republicans, and I'll never forget. I was listening to the debates, and imagine this: 40 years ago, it'll be 42 years ago. They made the decision there in Cleveland, Ohio, that gun control, Second Amendment, and abortion rights, and that's for 42 years later. We're still talking about what they decided there in Cleveland. Wow. Man. I mean, it just shows you how long, really just from a societal standpoint, how long it takes to actually address issues, or, things are still current, obviously. But as IRS though, during that year, how did your boss take it when they said, "Hey, look,
I get it, a candidate for president, but still, I mean, it's like you got work to do. How did you manage to swing all of that and go to all these cush places, like Iowa and Kansas and Nebraska?
Well, as a
I mean, after working in Cleveland, Ohio, I could see everything is kind of a step up at that point, isn't it?
I enjoyed every case that I worked there, the agents. My training officer was Frank Busta, and he's deceased now, but he was an old Irishman. And Frank and Ted Bloomstein and many others, they helped change my life and lead me down the path, and I feel a successful career in law enforcement.
Very successful. People, our listeners here, you're going to be amazed at some of the stuff this guy's done as we go through his interview today. So this is going to be good.
Hey, before we get too far down the road, I want to just wheel back for a second because this is a question Murph's talked about when we talk about how accurate is Narcos. We've talked to the guys who did the Cali cartel, other folks who've been involved in series. I remember that too, because look, being from Kansas, we had the Wichita State team die in a plane crash, and that happened to Marshall. And so I saw the movie with Matthew McConaughey. Did you see that movie?
Absolutely. And my son, Benjamin, who was Marshall student government president when that was filmed, and he got to drive McGee, the director, around, and you can barely see him in one of the scenes.
That's a claim to fame. Well, let me ask you though, how, just give us an idea, how accurate did the movie accurately portray the university in the aftermath?
Overall, the movie was very accurate, and you got to think about the theme, and that the theme is rebirth. Marshall wanted to abolish the football program. Marshall was really a basketball school then, and they wanted to abolish it, and people made the decision to keep the football program. And think about it. If we wouldn't have kept the football program, you wouldn't have had the Chad Penningtons and the Byron Leftwiches and the Randy Mosses and stuff like that. So a good decision was made. I tell people I went there in 4 years, and in 4 years I saw 3 home wins. And so a lot of people, it took a lot of people supporting the team to keep the team.
3 wins, man. That reminds me, growing up in Kansas, we used to call them the Kansas State Mildcats instead of the Wildcats. They went we suffered through that too before they kind of had their way. But Marshall actually did. They've had a resurgence, like you say, but they've done fairly well over the past few years. Have, I think, been to a couple bowl games, and they've had some good records.
Oh, absolutely. And for example, when I went to Marshall, could you imagine if someone would have said, on September of 2022, you're going to be playing Notre Dame? I would have laughed at them. And think about that. Marshall University is playing Notre Dame in 2022. That speaks to.
I hate to disappoint you in the head, pal.
Geez.
I should have. Here we go. So I was there. My dad taught ROTC out at Notre Dame. I was there when Rudy was there, when Eric Parsegan was there, and when Joe Theismann, before it was Theismann for Heisman. I did my graduate work at Notre Dame. So all I can tell you, pal, sorry, man, go Irish. But anyway, but I will tell you this, though. Regardless of the outcome, the thing I always look forward to, especially with college football games, just the sportsmanship, the camaraderie. And you know what? And having been to that stadium, being in front of Touchdown Jesus, I went through football games down on the field by the end zone when we played Navy. It's an experience. And I look forward to these kids getting a memory of a lifetime playing, at the Golden Dome there and seeing Touchdown Jesus as Notre Dame scores a lot of touchdowns against the obviously weak Marshall defense. But we'll take a bet on that, sir. Well, we'll have, you like governors do? We'll have a bet here, okay, on the game outcome. So,
Jeff,
you know what we'll do?
I apologize,
sorry,
Jeff.
You know what we'll do? We'll leave it open to our players out there. You guys tell us what the bet would be. If Jeff and Marshall win, what do I owe him? And if me and Notre Dame win, which is inevitable, I hate to take the bet, but what do they owe us? So we'll see.
I
let me just weigh in on this bet here, because you're challenging somebody from the IRS. Do you really want him calling Washington and having your taxes reviewed and make a full audit? I think you want him to win.
I just got my refund check. See that I even pointed it out? I'm going to shred it. First time I've gotten a refund check from these type bastards in the last like 12 years. So,
woohoo! Oh, that's funny.
When you're self-employed and you pay quarterlies and you get actually money back, it's a good day. So,
hey, Murphy, did you notice he did not have it electronically deposited, because he did not? He doesn't want us to know where his checking account is.
I think you guys are probably good enough. You could find him. And if you need help, hey, I'm available as a snitch. Now I charge you for my information, but hey,
and you know how you can tell when Murphy's snitching? He's showing up to your party holding a glass of ginger ale, and everybody's patting him down for the wire.
There you go. There you go. And that's pretty much true in the law enforcement culture. When you're new, I mean, why are you not drinking alcohol? Are you trying to get something on everybody?
What do you got a ginger ale for? Hey, put your arms up, turn around. Anyway, we have digressed, so we'll figure out.
I do want to ask one thing here. Excuse me, Morgan. Would you guys be okay if, and not to get sappy or corny or anything, but I'd like for us to dedicate this interview to the memory of the Marshall football team. That crash happened on November 14th, 1970. 75 people on board that plane. 37 were the football team itself, 8 members of the coaching staff, 25 boosters, and 5 flight crew members. So with y'all's permission, we will dedicate this to the memory of the Thundering Herd that passed away in 1970. Is that okay?
Oh, bless you, Mr. Murphy. And I can't wait to let the Marshall University Athletic Department hear what you have done. Thank you so much.
Well, and if you tell them I will put my hand over my WVU on my shirt. So when I say this, okay.
Hey, something that's a little eerie. So I just pulled that up too. So the Wichita State University football team, which they've never brought back football, their airliner crashed into the mountain over in Colorado, Friday, October 7th, 1970.
Wow. Yeah, that's a rough year.
Well, Mr. Murphy, true statement. The West Virginia University emblem was on the Marshall University football helmets when the Young Thundering Herd the following season.
I remember the story. Was Bobby Bowden the coach then?
Absolutely. And I've actually several years ago had the honor to talk to Bobby Bowden about Marshall football, and just Bobby Bowden. What a class act! What a class act!
And as much as people love West Virginia, and it is a beautiful state, there's not a lot of industry outside the coal industry and tourism and railroads.
Don't forget moonshine and meth.
Well, we're talking legal. So you should see. You want to start talking about my family again. But there are 2 major universities, are WVU and Marshall. And that's when everybody comes together. When there's, a dire need. There's been a horrific and not dastardly, but it's been a horrific occurrence. And the state bonds together. It always does. It always will. And that's what I love about West Virginia. Great place.
Dude, we can't. Okay, let's dedicate. But this is getting down. I mean, this is getting sad. We got to bring this back up and start taunting.
Let's make fun of a while.
Let's make fun of the FBI. Everybody loves doing that. No, back to our regular scheduled program. So,
but Jeff understands that.
And by the way, that's going to be one of our questions for you folks. If we haven't mentioned Patreon enough, that is one of our questions, Stephen. This upcoming month's Q&A for Patreon is somebody wants to know why we dog the FBI so much.
Oh, good.
We're not going to answer that here. If you want to hear it, you got to listen on Patreon. Okay, back to this though. So, but Jeff, But again, the question was, how did you get your bosses to sign on to letting you go all over the place to do this? Was it simply because this guy could be the next president and you want to get on his good side?
I can tell you the truth that it is they're desperate for people. I'm being honest with you. No, you have your senior agents. Keep in mind, I'm just out of college. You have your senior agents who have significant investigations at the U.S. attorney's offices, and you're looking at your new agents, and they're freshly out of the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. They've qualified. They're They've been beaten down from the defensive tactics instructors. Your younger people do not have the caseload. So that's the real answer, that we are new, we're out of the academy, and we do not have the high caseload that would be hurt if we were on the road.
Wow, cool. Well, I mean, so what was it like? Because that was a historical. That's when he was running against Carter. Because then the second one he ran against Mondale, and the one in Mondale was a 49 state sweep. That wasn't even a contest, but they weren't sure, like you say, about Carter. So what was it like, going through all of those places, seeing all of these people that are later going to become president, first lady of the United States, vice presidents, folks like that? What was it like to get that piece of history?
I look back at that, and Jimmy Carter is such a good man. Ronald Reagan is a very good man. And I will tell you this, I would cherish if we could have an election like that again, where you have two men that look at the way they talked about one another. It wasn't about beating someone down, their personality or whatever. It was on the facts. And that is just so, I would welcome that if it came back that we dealt with the facts.
Absolutely.
One of the great lines, though, that came out of that, I remember Reagan was talking. He was there with President Carter. I think they were doing a debate. He says, a recession is when your neighbor loses their job. A depression is when you lose your job. And a recovery begins when he loses his job. And, but it was just the art of the communication, nothing personal. I mean, they just, it was very civil back then. And there's a lot of things around the timing, around the hostage rescue, out of Iran, things like that played into it. But still, to be a part of history like that, it's just, man, that's, I mean, for me, that's like awesome. We got to see, when I was on Salina PD, President Reagan came to Kansas State, and a lot of us were on standby. We didn't get to go actually there, but they had a bunch of cops on standby in case anything happened. But even then, like, brushing up, seeing all the Secret Service vehicles loaded with weapons and people and all the assets they bring in every time the president moves. I should have an entourage like that, Steve. Next time we go somewhere, I need you to get me a Suburban with two guys hanging out the back, okay?
I will, but I'm not guaranteeing where you might end up.
If there's a bag over my head.
Down in Mexico.
Yeah. If there's a bag over my head and I disappear. But anyway, back to our regularly scheduled podcast again. So what did you do after that, though, Jeff? Did you start picking up cases after that? What happens after the election's over?
I was assigned various investigations. All new agents are given assigned pure tax cases. So you're not getting into you may go out on a surveillance on organized crime. You may go out on surveillance on drugs, but the cases that you're required to work are your pure tax cases. And in fact, my first two cases, which are very rare today, is estate tax cases, where the executors or the executrix, they commit fraud to hide the assets of the person who has passed away. And the one case involved a circuit court judge in the Cleveland, Ohio area, and it was just that case allowed me to learn how to be a detailed investigator, to how to go through the records and also the interviewing, because you've got to be sensitive to the people that you're going out, because you're talking to people that lost a loved one. So I was very blessed in working those cases, which are very complex from the get-go.
Well, think about it. It's think about this, Maureen, and our listeners as well. You successfully prosecuted a judge. Now, a judge is a lawyer to start with, who ostensibly knows the law well enough that they can make rulings. Of course, they have their law books and case, past case law to refer back to. But that's somebody that's not just, you don't pick that guy off the street. That's somebody who has been in the judicial system for years and years and is typically respected. And here a federal agent is taking down a sitting judge. You don't hear that very often. I mean, that's I hate to say a feather in your cap, but damn, good job.
Well, it was a ruthless case. For example, it had many parts in it, and one part was the Youngstown Syndicate. And the Youngstown Syndicate was, and this was in 1980, probably 30 years prior to that, they formed this group of investors to buy property in Youngstown because they speculated that Youngstown would boom and would become the next Cleveland.
And Jeff, real quick too, when you said syndicate, I don't want people to get confused because a lot of people think syndicate like organized crime, but you're talking about an investing syndicate.
Correct. Correct. Thank you so much. But it was called on paper the Youngstown Syndicate. But so you had all these investors, and they invested in speculating that this was going to be a big boom. Well, in the 70s, the deceased person met with all the investors and said, listen, I am sorry to inform you that this is a flop. And what I recommend is you sign over the real estate to me because the property taxes are going to be way more than what the value of the property is. Mm-hmm. So we had to track down all these investors, and many of which, when they retired, they moved to Miami, Florida. And I got to tell you, that was an eye-opener, guys, in that I would go into a neighborhood, which I kid you not, one of the neighborhoods, there was actually a shooting while we were driving there. But I found where this elderly lady lived, and all her blinds were pulled and everything. And I knocked at the door, and I got a kid. She was scared to death because when she had bought that house 30 years earlier, it was a great neighborhood, and all her friends and everything. But over those years, the people died, and here she is all by herself. And it was when I told her that the Youngstown Syndicate was not sold at the courthouse, front of the courthouse, you could just see the look on, and I believe she was close to 90 at that time. You could just see the look on this one lady's face, how I cannot believe that they did this to me. And that was the case. But it was that particular case really gave me a good foundation to move forward.
So what was the result out of that case? I mean, you did the investigation. Did you get indictments, make arrests? What'd you do?
It went to trial, and the jury came back with all guilty verdicts.
Oh, that had to be satisfying for all of that work, but it's also, like you say, it's also satisfying because of what you did for that lady who lived in that neighborhood, who watched everything just disappear away from her future, like you say, friends, everything. It's not the neighborhood she bought 30 years ago.
Yeah. And it's because her money had dwindled away. All she had to live on was Social Security at that point. So it was a lot of sad interviews on that particular case.
I'll bet.
Mm-hmm.
Were you able to recover any money at all? Any victim compensation?
Very good question, and we'll get to this later on. At that time, there was no forfeiture. We did not have money laundering laws. So to answer your question, no, because there wasn't a method to facilitate that. Now, she could have civilly, but again, you need. But I could not do anything for her at that particular time in history.
And this was early 1980s, is that right?
Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Wow.
And Jeff, listen, you got to call Morgan, you got to call me, Steve, or Murph. We're not sirs, we're not misters. Yeah, we're your friends. You and I are brothers. We're probably related. We appreciate the respect, but we're not used to that.
If you call me sir one more time, I'm going to call up the coach, Marcus Freeman, and tell him to run up the score on Marshall. You've been warned, okay?
Okay.
All right. No mercy. All right. So, but let's, but how long did you stay with the IRS? Your whole career? Some of your career? Let's folks know what kind of progression did you make? You start off on the IRS, you work a few cases, you become a big shot because now the president knows you by name and the first lady. Now what happens?
There you go.
Well, I was a special agent from 80 through 93. And then I was a supervisory special agent from 93 through 2005. So 25 years, sir.
Wow. Well, when did you, so at some point you moved from Ohio and went back into West Virginia, right?
That is correct. In the early 80s, I spent my time in Cleveland and put in for a transfer. And as you know, with DEA, you can put in for that transfer, and I got it. And I was transferred to Parkersburg, West Virginia, and within
where you happened to go to high school.
Mm-hmm.
How big of a town is Parkersburg?
About 30,000. But here's the catcher on that is, Steve, even though that was my post of duty, I think I only worked maybe 2 or 3 cases there. They were all in the Morgantown, Fairmont, Clarksburg, Wheeling, and the Northern Judicial District of West Virginia.
Yeah,
I was on the road all the time.
Oh yeah, Morgantown, the home of West Virginia University. Woo!
WVU, yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, your one of your guests that you're going to have on your show is the former Colonel of the State Police, Tom Kirk, and I'll just give the audience a heads up on him. Is he called me and said, "Are you one of those guys that investigate the money from narcotics?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Would you meet me tonight?" And I said, "Well, okay, tell me when." "Where and when?" He says, "Tonight, 11 p.m. at the West Virginia University Coliseum." And I said, "Well, how will I know how to find you?" He says, No. I will find you. So
do you think you were getting set up at this point? Like somebody's going to roll you as a case? Or somebody you pissed off in a case?
Hey, needless to say, the gun was out.
Oh, yeah.
The gun was out. So I'm there, and I'm in my G car, which is a Buick, one of those first front-wheel drive Buicks that they had in Skylark. And all of a sudden, this green Chrysler Cordoba pulls up. And this car, I mean, it looks like it had been in one of these when the high school kids take a sledgehammer and you can pay $1 to beat on it. So he says, "You the IRS guy?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Get in." Well, I get in the car, the door was broken. And in fact, the headliner was so rotten, I had to drive around Morgantown with my hand up holding the headliner on the car so I could see.
And that was West Virginia's first take-home car for their state police, right?
Could have been. Trust me, that fine Corinthian leather was more rotten than you could imagine.
I'm shocked. Ricardo Montalban sang about that on his commercials, about the rich Corinthian leather.
I know. It's that was at his retirement party, needless to say, I brought that up, that he was so well respected. I said, "Why didn't you just rip the headliner out?" And he says, "That took away from the mystique of my car."
Ambiance.
Yeah.
We have a good story coming up for him. Yeah.
I got to tell you a quick story about Tom, because Morgan and I were scheduled to interview Tom this morning, and we're interviewing Jeff this afternoon. Of course, our listeners don't care about that, but I had to postpone because some concrete trucks were here at our house, and they were making a hell of a lot of noise. And seriously,
don't say concrete trucks. You're putting your pool in the backyard with the big slide, aren't you?
I was trying to be nice about it.
All right.
So anyway, Tom and I got in a conversation after I got a hold of him and said, "Listen, we've got to postpone." And he's very gracious. And we got to talking about him working undercover narcotics when he was with the West Virginia State Police as just a trooper. He's a road trooper. And we got some mutual friends in West Virginia. And he got to talking about how his beard had gotten so bushy. It's so thick that when he would come home from work, and if he'd been out for several days, his wife would stop him. We're talking about how our wives keep us in check. And he said she would meet him in the garage. She'd say, "You strip all your clothes down here. You go straight to the shower. I don't want to smell you. I don't want to see you till you've been cleaned up." And so he did, and he understood what she's talking about. And so they'd be sitting there watching TV after dinner.
And all of a sudden they'd hear this buzzing noise. And he's like, they're both looking like, what the hell is that? And he got to digging. His beard was so thick, he had little bitty critters living in the damn thing. Like, holy cow, where were you? So we're going to surprise him with that when we do his interview, because he shouldn't have told me that.
Well, I like this one though too about his car. You're going to have to during the course of this, give us a couple more stories we can tell, so Tom thinks that we've done our research.
Oh my goodness, guys, there's so many. I had not made an arrest yet in West Virginia. So, true story. We're going to arrest the mayor and the chief of police of Osage, West Virginia.
All
Dude,
right.
after a judge, isn't that taking a step down? But I mean,
yeah. But I got to kid you, the arrest record, that was the old days where you on the paper with the holes in it.
Mm-hmm.
I kid you not, their arrest records was close to 3 inches thick. The mayor and the chief of police.
Wow.
How do you stay chief of police with that many arrests?
It's West Virginia in the early 80s. Okay.
His last name wasn't White, was it?
No, but I got to tell you, one of the special agents I managed, he knew the White family.
Oh yeah.
Jessica White.
Hey, and if I could, and I should have done this at the beginning. I met Jeff and Tom both together. Was last month or month before. Mm-hmm. At the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners Conference in Columbus, Ohio. And it's rare that I meet people from West Virginia when we speak. And so these guys came up and we got to talking, and just an instant friendship. And just so our listeners know, Jeff and Tom have worked together years and years and years, even post law enforcement careers. So we're not, Tom, if you're listening to this, hell yeah, we are picking on you, but hey, that just kind of goes along with this podcast, right? Mm-hmm. But just that's the background for our listeners to know. First of all, how I got to know these guys, and why we're talking about Tom while we're interviewing Jeff. Because you know what, we're probably going to talk about Jeff when we interview Tom.
That's fair game. Fair game.
And we'll have Tom's interview recorded before any of these are published, so he won't have a thing to say about it. It'll be too late by then. So, all right, Jeff. Okay, here's one thing you got to give. Give us the most embarrassing event that you and him did.
Oh,
no, wait a minute. You're shaking your head like, how many? There are so many. Which one do I pick? Well, let's finish the story first about arresting the mayor and the police chief. I got to hear this.
Well, when we go through the door of this bar, I was going to do the backup, and Tom was going to, and another agent, Larry Minks, who's a great friend of both of ours, was going to, I was going to do the backup, and they were going to make the arrest. I was going to arrest the chief of police. Tom was going to arrest the mayor. Well, at the last minute, Larry Mink says, you're not doing the backup anymore. You're going to arrest the mayor. So we go in, and these guys, most of their arrests are fights. I mean, one guy beat a guy into a coma, and of course he lived. Mm-hmm. But we go in, I go, federal agent, you're up against the wall. And this guy looks at me, and his face just gets white. And I said, turn around. And the chief of police turns around. I said, let me have your right hand handcuffed, left hand handcuffed. And I'm here going, man, I'm a badass. Yeah. I'm a badass. This guy has all these arrest records. He listened to the Fed. So I take him down to the West Virginia State Police Barracks to fingerprint him and get all the information. And he looks at me and says, who was that guy behind you? And I said, well, that was Special Agent Larry Minks. And he said, my God, he says, I don't know if he was going to shoot you or Tom or me. He says, he was waving that gun around everywhere. He says, I thought you were going to take one in the back of the head. So needless to say, it blew. I thought I was something special, and it was the guy was scared to death that one of us was going to get shot.
Just stick with that story. The way you tell it's the best way.
Hey, so what were they getting arrested for this time?
It's narcotics. It was. We were, and Steve knows this. That's when Ronald Reagan formed the Presidential Narcotics Task Force, and I was very fortunate, blessed that I was assigned to that in the Northern Judicial District of West Virginia. It was as Steve knows, that was actually before OCDEF. So Ronald Reagan had formed it, and IRS had a very strong presence in the Presidential Narcotics Task Force, and very blessed to have been part of it.
Hey, let me throw out a name because I'm going to ask you about a story here real quick. Did you ever know an IRS agent out of Kansas by the name of Marty McCormick?
I did not, sir.
All right. Well, the only beef I had to pick with the IRS anytime they worked with us on our dope investigations or we were doing stuff, Marty, great guy. At that time, he had a green Ford LTD with tinted windows.
Mm-hmm.
And on more than one occasion, he ruined our surveillance because he would drive back and forth in front of the house. And we're like, Marty, quit driving back and forth in front of the damn house. They're going to figure this out. But the one thing that was always great, well, you guys couldn't share tax information, but I'll tell you what, though. We'd come in, it's like, get a detective so-and-so, you got the KBI. He'd just come in and say, I'm Marty McCormick. And then he'd look at him, he'd go, IRS. And the one guy went one time goes, oh, we're so screwed. He didn't care about us. He goes,
great.
Three letters that strike fear into the heart of men. Mm-hmm. The other frame was, Mike Wallace from 60 Minutes is here to see you. The other one is, I'm from the IRS. We're here to help. So,
yeah. Well, Morgan, see, that's the difference between Kansas and West Virginia. We had a way to get around that. We would do a application for a financial search warrant, and we would list the person has reported this income during these years, and then that way it made it public so law enforcement could have it. So we figured out how to do it legally.
Gosh darn it. Okay, note to self, when I go back to Kansas, I'm going to tell this trick to a couple of the guys. Okay, good stuff. Well, no, so what was the final outcome of that? So you arrested the chief. You thought you were badass, but the gun was apparently the most intimidating part of that conversation.
Exactly right. Exactly right. But after, Morgan, after a month or so, I was actually asked if I would help form the first Parkersburg Narcotics Task Force. So I was very blessed in being able to go back in forming that with the Parkersburg Police Department, Wood County Sheriff's Office, the FBI, DEA, and believe it or not, we actually had a guy by the name of Denny Huggins, who was with the West Virginia State Fire Marshal's Office, who was just an unbelievable investigator. So I was able to work narcotics cases in that area.
Why fire marshal?
Well, normally they do not, but Denny was one of the best polygraph operators I'd ever been around. And he had the ability we would talk people into saying, well, I know nothing about that. And we'd say, hey, we believe you, but just to make sure the U.S. Attorney's Office believes you, would you be willing to be polygraphed? And of course they would say, well, sure. And then fail it, and we'd go forth from that. But Denny was also very good in surveillance also. The story you gave about the green LTD, we had a very good team of federal agents with us. And here's how small the world is, Morgan. Guess who one of the agents was with DEA that helped us on the Parkersburg Narcotics Task Force?
Let's see. Well, you can't say Steve Murphy because he wasn't there at the time.
Mm-hmm. No. It ended up being Steve's boss in Columbia.
Joe Toft?
No.
Jerry Reinhardt, who's may he rest in peace.
Yeah, Jerry was our ASAC in Columbia, which was second level supervisor for our listeners.
Mm-hmm.
Assistant special agent in charge. So we have you're actually doing pretty good, Jeff. Ever since we gave you the directive that you didn't want me to run up the score, you have called me Morgan and Murph the way you should. So look at this, Steve. Here's an example for you to follow. Somebody who can follow direction.
Yeah, it depends on who it comes from. If it's coming from you, well, it's kind of like when the government gives us an order. We look at it as a suggestion.
Not so much. The only one I follow through is when the IRS says I owe them this much money, the Treasury, I pay it. So I argue later. So, but getting back to that, so what was the prevalent drug that you guys were dealing with during those times?
It was powder cocaine, homemade meth, and a lot of amphetamines. were there then.
Mm.
And there was a documentary on Hulu that came out. Michael Keaton played the doctor, and it was talk about dope sick. Now that was obviously later when we're talking about OxyContin, but that's been a hard hit area. I mean, just all around, right? Everything from you work that backwards to how meth impacted these families, cocaine impacted them, because there's a lot of poor areas in the state. A lot of people make their living off the coal mines, or off of, like you say, not a whole lot of things. How did that? I mean, you're from that area. How did that affect you when you went out, not just to do the cases, but you go out there and you see just the absolute sometimes squalor or things that are going on? You got to see how bad it really was in Appalachia, in some of those places.
Well, Morgan, I need to explain to you that where Parkersburg, West Virginia is, you're right at the Ohio River. So you're within 60 seconds in many cases from going into Ohio. So we had a large industrial base in Wood County in the early 80s. A lot of money, a lot of well-to-do people in that area. And as a result, that's why I believe the cocaine was so prevalent, because you had the people who had the ability to buy powder cocaine that had not been cut down a lot. In one case that we worked involved in you'll probably think I'm misleading you, but the DEA lab tested the Sinsemilla marijuana that we seized at Slate Creek, West Virginia, which is in Wood County. It was the highest THC content at that time that ever tested. And we were trading the Sinsemilla marijuana to a group out of Chicago that we were trading Sinsemilla marijuana for like 80% pure cocaine.
Wow.
And yeah.
Where was the marijuana coming from?
Grown in Wood County. The two people, and that's a story within itself, but the two people that were growing it, they were very, very good at how they were able to trim the buds and how they were able to work with the plants to make the THC content higher.
And Sinsemilla, if you don't know this, is considered higher grade because it doesn't have any seeds in it. And, when people are going to smoke weed, they pick the seeds out.
Absolutely. And guys, on that case, after I was able to flip one of the caretakers of the Sinsemilla marijuana, and as Steve knows, it's a lot of work on Sinsemilla. It's just like tomatoes. You got to cut off the branches to get more, like on tomato plants, But and again, my career has been filled with so much luck. I go to Chicago to try to track down the people distributing the cocaine, and I'm out on surveillance with a DEA agent, Steve, old Basil
Santos.
Yeah, old Basil, a legend. And I said, Basil, no one's here yet. I said, something tells me that if I was taking pictures, I would go right across the street to this photography studio. And he says, you're wasting your time. So I go over to the guy, and there was this elderly man, and it was one of these small shops that they had in the 80s, since we did not have digital photography then. And I showed him my credentials, and I said, sir, do you know Dan in the last name? And he looked at me and he just froze. And he pointed at me and says, I've been waiting on you. I said, you have? You've been waiting on me? And he says, yes. He says, I'll be right back. And I thought, man, he's going in the back to get a gun. He's coming out. So I unsnap and I'm there. He comes out and he lays these photos down. He says, I kept copies of them. And it's Dan and Cindy, the sources for the cocaine. It's pictures of them in the mountains of Peru.
Really?
Yeah, it's pictures of them at the Cincinnati marijuana fields in West Virginia, working on the flowers and the buds, and I'm there going, wow.
See, in law enforcement, we call that evidence now. That's good evidence.
Yeah. The U.S. attorney just said, this will be the first indictment for importation of drugs into the Northern Judicial District of West Virginia. They were just so excited. It was just over a hunch. It was just over a hunch. But we had Cindy on a mule with, on the back of the mule had
a real mule, not a person mule, a real
mule, bringing cocoa leaves off the mountaintop.
Wow. And, when you said something there, Jeff, that you've been very lucky, there's no such thing as luck. This comes from good work ethic, from being dedicated to your job. So, there's nothing lucky about it all. You just did what you were supposed to do.
See, now, for me, I always love to do interview and interrogation, and you got one of those trump cards there, because you can be sitting there talking to them. Have you ever done this? No. Is there any reason there would be pictures of you on a mule and, the mountains doing no. And then you just kind of lay one out there. Well, can you explain this?
Where did this come from?
And can you explain this? I got a whole stack of them with your name on them here. Let's play this game, So did you get a chance to interview Cindy?
Oh, yes. And that's a story. Cindy lawyered up, Dan lawyered up. I knew, it was so ironic, I knew both of their attorneys. And they came and said, we will plead to 1-count tax evasion if Cindy would cooperate against Dan. And we worked it out. 1-count tax evasion, 5 years. She turned it down. And she ended up getting 20 years, and Dan got 30.
See, when you're a defense lawyer and you look at that, that's one of those stories where you go back to your wall. There's a spot on the wall where they bang their head and they go, I told her.
Yeah. But Steve, I don't know if this ever happened with you. The Marshal Service for close to a year could not get Dan's fingerprints. He had the ability that every time that they would take him to get fingerprints, he would just start sweating. They said it was just all smudged.
I've heard of people like that, but I've never seen one.
Yeah, but so finally, the Bureau of Prisons got him up at 3 a.m. in the morning, took him in, got his fingerprints, and it was just amazing the aliases that he had across the United States.
Wow.
I mean, it was, but it took months to get that.
Yeah, that's what happens when you arrest Aquaman. Tough to
That's
fingerprint those
like.
fins. Yeah. No, I don't know. There was something I think called hyperhidrosis. I ran into that in a crime scene course one time. They talk about it could happen because you also had to do, if you had dead bodies or they'd been in the water and skin would slip off, you'd have to put it over. Anyway, fun stuff like that. But I bet you Cindy was sitting in prison after that. What did they really think they were going to go to trial and win?
I cannot answer that, but until both of those defense attorneys died from old age, every time they would see me, they said, Jeff, every time I look at you, I say, why in the world didn't she take that plea? So
criminals are not the smartest people. We had a guy when I was stationed in Greensboro that was bringing, 15 to 30 keys of coke down from New York City to Salisbury, North Carolina, those small college town, rocking it up into crack and selling it. And he was looking at mandatory life under the sentencing guidelines, federal sentencing guidelines, because of his prior record and the amount of coke that he'd brought to North Carolina. And he thought we were a bunch of podunk hick cops. And his first lawyer hired a big drug attorney, and I think out of Miami, and we offered a deal, 20 years, plead up straight up to the conspiracy and 20 years. And he was 35 years old at the time, and he fired his lawyer, hired a New York City lawyer. He came down to look at it, and we talked to him, and he said, I've advised my client to plead out, to accept the deal. He says he wants to go to trial, so we're going to trial with you. Mandatory life. We hung him out by the ears. Stupid.
And if you want to hear the rest of that story, that is one of our Patreon Case of the Month episodes. We talked about that one, Steve.
Yep, that's right.
Sorry, I'm shilling. Look, we're poor. If you're the IRS and listening, do not report me, Jeff. We're poor. We're trying to make a little money on the side here. Pay us in cash only. Send us money. No.
But Steve, if I may, Steve, of interest, you may like this.
Uh-huh.
We had testimony from dozens and dozens of people who helped transport the cocaine from Chicago to Parkersburg, West Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually got the federal judge to agree that we could use demonstrative evidence. And we actually used procaine and was able to show, we were allowed to introduce it and show the jury what 2 kilos in a plastic bag were and what this looked like. And that was pretty cool.
So you said procaine.
Yeah, it's a cutting agent. I don't know if they still make it, but it was a cutting agent used in the early 80s.
And so you packaged it up to look like 2 kilos so people could see what a kilo looked and felt like.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Now, the real danger would have been if one of those guys you handed the kilo to started cutting it open and wanted to do the old Telly Savalas. Let me.
Hey, you can't put anything, out of
Don't put anything in front of that guy's nose. He'll sniff it. There goes one juror number 12. Yeah.
Oh,
Well, but let's talk about too, because you worked a lot in narcotics, and I want to let people know where this is going, because you're thinking we're just telling stories. Where we're going eventually takes you to Iraq and Saddam Hussein and Tariq Aziz, and I want people to know that's where we're going. So why are we laying this out? Because it's important to lay this stuff out so you kind of see the trajectory, the path. Because you were IRS the whole time, but you worked a lot with the state police. You worked cross agency, the FBI, the ATF. Out of all the cases that you worked during that time, which one, trying to find the right words to it, which one actually for you made the most impact? I mean, but let's not talk about Baghdad yet, but which out of those cases you worked, which one for you, even if it didn't make national headlines, was one of the cases you go, this one I'm proud of. I would hang my, hat on this one. This is the one.
That would be the drug-wise. I have 2, one tax-wise and one drug-wise, and that would be a case in Morgantown, West Virginia. In the individual's name was John Pankulis, and John Pankulis was a student from New Jersey that came to WVU and decided, why do I need to go to class when I can just sell cocaine? And that case was in, I believe Tom is going to, one of your other guests is going to talk about that case. But that's that, and very proud of that case. But also, the tax case was Bernard Lee Burgess. And Bernard Lee Burgess was the 5th largest brake shoe manufacturer in the world. And in the indictment and the press releases, everything I'm telling your listeners has been released. But Bernard Lee Burgess just had the really very good skimming operation, skimming the gross receipts of his business by setting up fictitious P.O. boxes in West Virginia and Pennsylvania, and forming corporations and falsifying payments to those corporations to reduce the tax liability of his corporation. And that case, to my knowledge, is one of the largest tax evasion cases in the history of West Virginia. But even more important was I was able to, his mistress, I was able to obtain her cooperation, and she cooperated against the last known organized crime figure in the state of West Virginia. And this is also a public record, and that was Paul Hankish. Paul Hankish had his legs blown off in a car bomb in Youngstown, and we were able to seek her cooperation. And that's an interesting case, guys, in that how that case was made was he built a multi-million-dollar home for his mistress, and I got the blueprints, and I've always enjoyed building things. And I got the blueprints and just started from the basement, and I would go out and contact concrete engineers, you name it, and I actually rebuilt the house, and all the house was paid for in cash. So, but
when you say you rebuilt the house, what do you mean? Just from a financial standpoint?
From a financial standpoint. For example,
because I didn't know the IRS had that much money to go out and rebuild a multi-million-dollar mansion for court. There's demonstrative evidence. Come out and see the mansion, folks.
You got it. For example, the heating and cooling for a house this size was massive, and I figured there was only one company that could do a house this size, and I went to and met with the owner, and I said, "Can you help me?" He goes, "Yes, I can." And he hands me the folder. And how Mr. Burgess put the heating and cooling system in that house was he falsified the invoices. It was for a cleaner at one of his factories that removed asbestos from the air of the workers. So rather than putting that air cleaner in, he falsified the records and put the heating and cooling in his mistress's house. So I was every component, the windows, the copper gutters, everything about that house, I would find out where the money came from to build that house.
Now, when you said he took away the machine that cleaned the asbestos, was that just on paper, or did he really take away a real physical machine and instead put in the heating cooling?
He didn't even put it in. He handed the receipt to the federal EPA and said, "Here, I put this in." They never checked that. They took the record for the value of the record, and it was falsified. That record, although it showed air duct cleaning, it was actually for heating and cooling for the mistress's house.
So his workers in that place should have had additional safety equipment, and this guy screwed them over so he could build a house for his mistress.
Absolutely, and that's why he received 8 years and served 8 years in federal prison.
So when you say it was one of the largest fraud cases, how much money are we talking about here?
I do not have that memory, Morgan, but it was in the millions. It was in the millions.
But, at some point you go, doesn't it take a lot of effort? I mean, I would get exhausted trying to keep 15 shell companies going in different invoices and stuff. You almost have to have a knack, which obviously they do a knack for this, but it's like, man, I'm just trying to balance our own checkbooks, and me and Murph, with our little media company, our powerhouse media. That's enough for me. Trying to do 15 fake, companies and invoices. You would spend all your day creating fake paper trails.
Well, that's what his mistress's job was.
Hence why she became a great informant when you flipped her.
Absolutely.
How did you manage that, by the way? What was your pitch to her to say, come work for Team America?
Hey, he's already wooed Nancy Reagan. I mean, this girl, she's going to be no problem.
Do you know did you show up in jeans with the oil stains on them and say, "I'm your Huckleberry"?
No, I actually used a family member.
Yours or hers?
Hers. I actually used one of her family members stating, "This is massive. You better talk to her and tell her she needs to come to the right side." Oh my gosh, guys, so many memories. You guys know what a Nagra is from your work, the old Swiss, and they put off heat.
Oh, yeah.
Massive amounts of heat. Let's ask Lou Velosi or Dominic Polifron, who had it over the family jewels during many operations.
Oh, yeah.
And she went undercover with Tom Kirk, who's going to be one of your guests, and we put that Nagra. She was well endowed, and we put that Nagra there, and they said, "Are you going to be okay?" And she goes, "Yeah, I'll be okay." Well, it actually burned her in the area.
You had to put something underneath a Nagra when it was taped to your skin, or it would literally burn your skin.
Yeah. Steve, it was actually in a one of those sock sleeves, and it still did it.
Oh, gee.
But
Oh,
but you talk about it. I went in to this very nice restaurant in Wheeling, West Virginia, and I'm there having my dinner, watching Paul Hankish on his nubs from where he had his lower legs blown off, going around, and he would come to a chair and he'd put his hands down and just pick himself up and on this chair, and it was a sight to see. But Tom, one of your next guests, is he was a very, very good undercover agent, guys. And
yeah.
I mean, I've trusted him with $1 million in cash in a briefcase when we bought a bar one time. So,
Wow.
but
You bought a bar. Do you still have it?
no, it was. Then we had money laundering, and it was auctioned off, and the West Virginia State Police got the money for it.
Oh, yeah.
That's
but
interesting.
that would have been a fantastic place to do this interview, wasn't it, in the bar?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's but no. The Bernard-Lee Burgess case was very complex, and really, when you came down to it, Morgan, you said keep tracking things. What we eventually was able to find out was he had so many customers throughout the world, and he just picked certain customers, and those customers were not entered into the books, the books and records that all the governmental agencies would get. So he kept it separate. So in those invoices went to these PO boxes that the office staff did not know about. So once we found out where how he was doing this, it was quite easy.
Now, you said he was organized crime. One of the last, was he affiliated with any of the known families that we know about, or just kind of a regional OC family?
Okay, let me make sure. Bernard-Lee Burgess was not OC. It was his secretary went against Paul Hankish, which was an unrelated case.
Oh, okay.
But the information was that people came from New York to kill him, and instead of killing him, they just blew off his lower legs.
Did they mean to kill him and screw up, or was that the message?
Yeah, they meant to kill him.
Well, I guess he's got a new nickname now.
No, he died in federal prison.
He died in federal. That's a good place. Room temperature are good for guys like that. So, how long did this operation go on with your with the mistress until how long did she work for you guys?
For approximately 6 to 8 months, like that. So.
And the question I have on that too is, having been in trials, we've all been in trials, and for folks who haven't, sometimes they're slam dunks. You go in there and you say, "Here's the video surveillance. The guy pointed a gun at the other guy, pulled the trigger, he's dead." That's easy. This is complex. How do you present a complex case to a jury, and A, not bore the holy shit out of them, and B, take the complex and makes it simple so they can arrive at that conclusion? Did they violate federal law, these statutes?
Well, let me state, Mr. Burgess pled guilty. He pled guilty, so we did not go to trial. But we've had other trials which are very complex. In utilizing the technology that's been developed over the years, rather than using paper and giving jurors thousands and thousands of documents of paper, publishing them on video like PowerPoints, putting them on the screen, and your jury has their own little monitor in front of them, publishing those. I mean, we've introduced in some cases over 3,000 documents in an hour to the jury.
Wow.
Dang.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I'll tell you what, it does. And that now when you start talking money laundering, tax evasion, other stuff where there's cutouts and shells and this and that, I mean, the jury has to be able, at the end of the day, understand what they've just been told, and be able to make those decisions. So That's interesting. But yeah, the technology has helped. Otherwise, you're killing a bunch of force every time you have a case. Murphy, wasn't it you saying, what was that one case you talked about where you had to transport a lot of the cases you had, or was it you or somebody else talked about when they're sitting there in court, they had 50 or 75 banker boxes behind him with all of the.
That was the Manuel Noriega trial down in Miami with Steve Greeley and.
This one you provided security for, right?
No, I just happened to be in town from Columbia with a Colombian police officer, and he wanted to go see the courthouse, and just so happened it was lunchtime, and we asked the marshals, could we see, Pineapple Face sitting there in court? And when they brought him in after lunch break, but before the jury came in, we were allowed to walk through the courtroom and get a little peek at the man.
And how big was the fortress of boxes?
Oh, it was so big that so Steve and both these guys are DEA agents. Steve sat at the prosecutor's table, and Lenny sat. He had a chair like in the sea of boxes, and when they go to look they had everything categorized. So when they needed a piece of evidence, that was Lenny's job, was to find it in one of those boxes.
Man,
monumental! It's monumental.
MVP.
He is. He's now an attorney.
Yeah. So, Jeff. So, when you started working these cases, at some point, like I said, we're moving towards Iraq, but the world started changing, obviously, because you said that you became a supervisor, from 93 to 2005. So right before that, we had the first World Trade Center bombing. That was kind of, it seemed like an isolated event, but we started looking at the rise of Al-Qaeda. We looked at terrorism financing. We looked at all of those different things. When did you start, what point did you start looking at it from the terrorism standpoint? When did that kind of work start coming your way?
Nationally, the IRS Criminal Investigation Division sent a cryptic email out, and they said, well, let me put that on pause and go back. 9/11 occurs. I'm driving to make an arrest in West Virginia. And I get a phone call from Washington, D.C., and it said, Agent Sandy, we need you to go to this secure location in eastern United States. Stop what you're doing, go pack for 30 days, and get as many agents. We'll get as many agents as we have available, and we're putting them under your command. So I go home, pack every piece of underwear I've got and whatever, and I start driving. They would not tell me where I'm going. So I'm driving. I'm about an hour away from Washington, D.C. They tell me where I'm going. And for the next 30 days, I'm at this facility.
Is it the seat of government for the United States when all hell breaks out?
I cannot. That's one thing, even though I'm been retired, I won't disclose that location. But I got to tell you a funny story about that. We get information that a Cessna plane had left Oklahoma City, had stopped to refuel in Louisville, and was about 300 miles away from this location. And you're talking about, I'm a grade 14 special agent, and I have this military guy says, Mr. Sandy, what do you want us to do? And I said, this is a no-fly zone. Put them up. And I got to tell you, you talking about impressive. These two jets went up, and one went under that Cessna, and one got on top, and they kept radio for him. You need to land. This is your last opportunity. You land, or we're going to blow you out of the sky. And the one in the middle rolled out, and the guy came down, and that guy turned his plane and landed at the facility where we were at, and he was drug out of there.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, because I was in Loudoun County. I was actually in the Reagan building when 9/11 happened. We walked across the bridge and saw the Pentagon burning and that stuff. And so I know what you're talking about, because we heard the jets flying combat air patrol over us. But because the reason I asked that too is because there was a trial before that, or no, there was a trial that came later. It was the Holy Land Foundation. But there was but I remember when they started looking at the financing, a lot of places in Loudoun County and a lot of places in Fairfax County, they looked at from a terrorism financing standpoint.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And it's for your listeners to get a grasp of this, the millions of dollars involved that were advertised to help feed the poor and needy kids of the Middle East.
Mm.
So much of that was from these bubble gum and lifesaver machines that when you would go into a dental office, a lawyer's office, and please donate. And very familiar, Morgan, with that case. But so Morgan, after that 30 days, that's when I volunteered to work in eastern United States at our nation's first fusion center. And I was there for many months. And then I'll go to the story that I started to tell you. And that was, we got a cryptic email that said, if you're able to work in an environment that reaches over 100 degrees and you're able to sleep outside and so forth, we would like for you to consider volunteering. And I put my name in the hat for that.
How do you know they weren't talking about South Florida? Because that sucks during the summer. It gets over 100, and them bugs down there. My God,
Phoenix.
You know, they never gave me that option, Morgan.
And I don't think you were headed. I think you knew you weren't going to head to Florida. So
yeah.
Hey, so to the extent you can disclose what you can disclose for that 30 days in this, we'll talk offline. But I have actually, before we do that, there used to be another classified facility that was exposed by the Washington Post that was in the great state of West Virginia. That should anything happen, it was a huge bunker. Is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. If you have an opportunity to go there, please go there. It's just a wonder. Everyone needs to go there in their lifetime. And in fact, I'm probably doing something unethical right now because my governor family owns that place now.
You're not doing it unethical because I asked you about it, and I would tell people go visit this if you get a chance. So don't worry, I can edit all this out. I can make you look good or I can make you look bad, Jeff. It's up to you. You know what I mean? We can make a deal here. But tell us, what's the name of it? Tell the people about it.
Well, that was not where I went. But
no. I'm talking about the one that is the place we need to go in West Virginia.
Oh, that's the Greenbrier Resort. And it is just a wonderful place to go. The food is just outstanding. If you're married, the Swedish massage. My wife, she just enjoys that so much. Horseback riding, the carriage ride through the mountains. It's just a special place to go to. And if you're a golfer, the golf, they had PGA events there. It's just a wonderful place to go. But to go to what you said, there is a tour that you can go with you can actually walk through it all, where if we had a nuclear war, your legislators, Congress, Senate, could actually live in this underground bunker. And they show you their beds where they would live, the auditorium, which people thought it was to watch movies. It was where actually our United States of America would operate. So it's very well worth the tour.
And that's in White Sulphur Springs.
Yes, sir.
And it happened as the Cold War was escalating in the 50s. I mean, they've got this facility built underground. In fact, I was just pulling it up. The name of the facility was codenamed Project Greek Island. And that's what it was. It was an island unto itself. The ability to sustain hundreds of people for an extended period of time and continue to run continuity of government, which was now, it's well known now that Mount Weather used to be a classified facility until a jet crashed into the side of the mountain and people started showing up in black BDUs with M16 saying, stay away from it here. So that's how, a lot of these things, but I think they got outed by the Washington Post in some story. But anyway, it's right. It's huge. It's great. And by the way, too, there may be, there's a rumor that maybe some of the Army may do some training in some certain areas of West Virginia for some of their elite operators. I've heard that. It's a rumor. Can you confirm or deny, Jeff?
Well, we're very fortunate in West Virginia. We have a wonderful National Guard, and we provide training for countries all over the world. And because of the strip mining, coal mining operations, you have vast amount of property there which has been reclaimed. The rivers for swiftwater rescue. It's just this past year we had a national exercise here, which military from all over the United States, which my office, Department of Homeland Security, was involved. It's just there's so many. West Virginia's got such a wide area of wilderness and property and rivers and in former coal mines and stuff. It's a wonderful place to train.
Hey, players, that is the end of part one with Jeff Sandy, obviously our favorite guy from the IRS ever. Hey, by the way, if you want to hear part two, that's coming out in just a few days. Part two will come out on Thursday. You can catch the rest of the cases that we're talking about and what else Jeff is working on. In the meantime, go check us out on the socials, at Game of Crimes on Twitter, at Game of Crimes Podcast on Facebook and the Instagram. But where you got to be, patreon.com/Game of Crimes. We are launching in the month of July our latest series, The Real DEA Narcos, talking about the real DEA Narcos, Cali edition. Chris Feistel and Dave Mitchell talking about the takedown of the Cali cartel. You will only get that if you join us at the Guardian of the Realm or Warden of the Throne level. So make sure you come on over to patreon.com/Game of Crimes. In the meantime, go check out our webpage, gameofcrimespodcast.com. That's where we put our books, pictures, everything else about the guests. And as always, we welcome your feedback. So hit us up, gameofcrimespodcast@gmail.com. Remember to subscribe, hit that link up there no matter which player you're on, and also give us those 5 stars. Spotify, Apple, they both got it. Make sure you do it. We would really appreciate it. In the meantime, stay tuned for part 2 of our favorite man from the IRS, Jeff Sandy, as we talk about some of the cases he worked on in the great state of West Virginia.